The woman who could thread a needle at 3 miles was about to be humiliated by someone who couldn't hit a barn door at 50 feet. In the sprawling complex of Pine Ridge Tactical Academy, surrounded by testosterone-fueled egos and whispered doubts, she sat quietly in the back corner of the briefing room. Her secret would soon shatter everything they believed about precision, about dedication, and about the thin line between impossible and inevitable. But first, they had to break her spirit. Or so they thought. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Colorado mountains like a shroud, wrapping Pine Ridge Tactical Academy in an otherworldly silence that would soon be shattered by the crack of precision rifles and the weight of shattered assumptions. This wasn't just any shooting school. This was where legends were born, where military snipers came to push the boundaries of what physics and human capability could achieve together. Elena Vasquez moved through the facility like a ghost haunting her own story. 28 years old, average height, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun that never seemed to come loose, no matter how much she moved. She wore the standard-issue Academy trainee uniform, the same slate gray that marked everyone as equal in theory but never in practice. Her movements were economical, precise in a way that most people attributed to nervousness rather than discipline. When she walked, her footsteps seemed to apologize for existing. The other trainees barely noticed her. In a world where confidence was currency and bravado bought respect, Elena's quiet presence registered somewhere between furniture and background noise. She carried herself like someone who'd learned that the safest place was often invisible, that the loudest voices rarely belonged to those who actually knew what they were talking about. Her gear was meticulously maintained but unremarkable, her rifle case worn but not distinctive, her entire presence calculated to blend into whatever environment surrounded her. Pine Ridge attracted a certain type of person: military snipers looking to refine their skills, law enforcement marksmen seeking advanced training, and civilian competitors with more money than sense who wanted to play soldier for a few weeks. The Academy's reputation was built on impossibility made routine, on shots that defied logic, and instructors who'd forgotten more about ballistics than most people would ever learn. The waiting list stretched 2 years, the dropout rate hovered around 60%, and the stories that emerged from successful graduates bordered on mythology. The facility itself sprawled across 1,500 acres of pristine wilderness, with ranges that stretched from urban environments to alpine scenarios. The longest range disappeared into the mountains at 4,200 yards, where even the most advanced optics turned targets into mathematical abstractions. Weather stations dotted the property like technological prayer flags, feeding real-time data about wind speed, barometric pressure, temperature gradients, and humidity to computers that calculated solutions most human minds couldn't comprehend. But the heart of Pine Ridge wasn't its technology. It was the culture of excellence that permeated every conversation, every training session, every moment of shared experience among people who understood that in their world, second place meant someone didn't come home. The instructors were legends, their names whispered with reverence in circles where precision mattered more than publicity. Chief Instructor Marcus Webb had confirmed kills at ranges that remained classified. Senior Instructor Sarah Martinez held the unofficial record for consecutive first-round hits in combat conditions. Instructor David Kim had written the manual that redefined long-range ballistics calculations. Among the trainees, hierarchy established itself within hours. Combat veterans claimed the front rows during briefings, their service patches and quiet confidence marking them as the Academy's natural aristocracy. Law enforcement officers formed their own clusters, sharing war stories from urban battlefields, where precision meant the difference between saving a hostage and creating a tragedy. Civilian competitors, often wealthy enthusiasts who dominated local shooting circuits, found themselves struggling to adapt to an environment where their trophies meant nothing and their assumptions were constantly challenged. And then there was Elena, who belonged to none of these groups and seemed content to remain unaffiliated. She sat where others wouldn't, spoke when others had finished, and observed with an intensity that most mistook for confusion. Her notebook filled with observations that went far beyond the official curriculum, tracking patterns in wind conditions, noting the subtle differences in rifle harmonics between morning and afternoon sessions, calculating solutions to problems that hadn't been assigned. The Academy's daily rhythm was built around precision. Morning briefings at 0600 hours, where weather conditions and range assignments were distributed with military efficiency. Physical training that emphasized the specific muscle groups and cardiovascular demands of long-range shooting. Technical sessions on ballistics, optics, and environmental factors that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. And then the ranges, where theory met reality in the form of targets placed at distances that challenged both equipment and human capability. Elena excelled in the classroom portions, though she never volunteered answers and rarely spoke unless directly questioned. When she did speak, her responses were concise and technically accurate, delivered in a quiet voice that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Her written work was flawless, demonstrating an understanding of ballistics principles that impressed even the instructors, though they attributed it to studious preparation rather than practical experience. On the ranges, she was competent but unremarkable. Her positions were textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, her trigger discipline exemplary. She consistently placed shots within acceptable parameters but never pushed beyond the minimum requirements. While other trainees competed for the tightest groups and the most challenging shots, Elena seemed content to meet the standards and fade back into invisibility. This pattern continued for the first 3 weeks of the 8-week course. Elena attended every session, completed every assignment, and maintained her position in the middle of the class rankings. She ate meals alone, cleaned her equipment in solitude, and spent her evenings reviewing notes, while others shared stories and built the camaraderie that often lasted entire careers. The other trainees began to form opinions about her. Some saw her as dedicated but limited, someone who worked hard but lacked the natural talent that separated good shooters from great ones. Others dismissed her as a tourist, a civilian who'd paid for an experience she couldn't truly comprehend. A few recognized something different in her observations, in the questions she didn't ask, in the way she seemed to already understand concepts that were being presented as revelations. But nobody suspected the truth. Nobody imagined that the quiet woman in the back corner carried secrets that would redefine their understanding of what human beings could achieve when necessity stripped away every limitation except the laws of physics. Nobody guessed that her careful anonymity was a choice rather than a limitation, that her silence contained volumes of experience that none of them could imagine. The Academy's most challenging range was known simply as Ghost Valley, a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside where distances stretched beyond the horizon and environmental conditions changed with the unpredictability of high-altitude weather systems. It was here that the Academy's reputation was truly earned, where shots that seemed impossible on paper became routine demonstrations of human capability pushed to its absolute limits. Ghost Valley's longest confirmed shot belonged to Chief Instructor Webb, a 3,847-yard precision hit, achieved under perfect conditions with equipment that represented the pinnacle of technological advancement. The target, a specially designed plate that registered impacts with electronic precision, stood like a monument to human achievement in a landscape that dwarfed such accomplishments. The shot had taken 3 attempts, with extensive calculations and environmental monitoring, and had been witnessed by a dozen Academy instructors who'd signed affidavits confirming the achievement. The record had stood unchallenged for 4 years, not because others hadn't tried, but because the combination of skill, conditions, and equipment required to achieve such precision at extreme range occurred rarely enough to make each attempt an event rather than a routine training exercise. Students learned about the shot during their first week, studying the environmental conditions, the equipment specifications, and the mathematical principles that had made it possible. Elena listened to these briefings with the same quiet attention she brought to every other aspect of her training. She asked no questions about the record, made no comments about the achievement, showed no particular interest in the technical details that fascinated other students. Her notebook captured the information with the same methodical precision she applied to every other lesson, filing it away among the hundreds of other observations that filled page after page of careful documentation. What Elena didn't document, what she couldn't risk putting into any permanent record, was the way her hands had remained perfectly steady during the briefing about extreme-range shooting. She didn't note how her breathing had remained controlled when other students gasped at the distances being discussed. She couldn't record the calculations that ran through her mind automatically, comparing the Academy's achievement to memories that belonged to another life, another identity, another war, where such shots weren't records to be celebrated but necessities to be executed without hesitation or fanfare. The 4th week brought advanced environmental training, where students learned to read conditions that extended far beyond the immediate shooting position. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mountain ranges created wind patterns that defied simple measurement, channeling air currents through valleys and across ridgelines in ways that required intuition as much as instrumentation. Temperature inversions could bend bullet paths in ways that seemed to violate physics, while humidity gradients created invisible barriers that could deflect even the most precisely aimed projectiles. Elena absorbed these lessons with an intensity that went unnoticed by most observers but didn't escape the attention of instructor Martinez, a former Marine sniper whose own combat experience had taught her to recognize the difference between academic understanding and practical knowledge. Martinez began watching Elena more carefully, noting the way she seemed to anticipate certain concepts before they were fully explained, how her questions, when she asked them, cut directly to the heart of complex issues rather than circling around surface details. During a particularly challenging session on reading mirage effects, Elena made an observation that caused Martinez to pause mid-sentence. The student had pointed out a subtle interaction between heat shimmer and crosswind indicators that wasn't covered in the official curriculum, a detail that required hundreds of hours of practical observation to recognize. When Martinez asked how she'd noticed such a specific phenomenon, Elena's answer was quietly evasive, suggesting she'd read about it in an advanced ballistics text that Martinez knew was classified military material unavailable to civilian students. The incident passed without further comment, but Martinez filed it away among a growing collection of small anomalies surrounding Elena's presence at the academy. The student's gear, while unremarkable in appearance, showed signs of use that went beyond casual competition shooting. Her rifle case had wear patterns that suggested extensive field deployment, while her spotting scope bore scratches that indicated prolonged exposure to harsh environmental conditions. Most telling were her hands, which showed the subtle scarring and callousing that came from years of handling precision equipment under stress conditions, rather than the softer marks left by weekend hobby shooting. But perhaps most intriguing was Elena's behavior during stress simulation exercises. The academy regularly subjected students to scenarios designed to replicate the psychological pressure of real-world shooting situations. Timed exercises, multiple target engagements, and simulated emergencies were meant to reveal how well students could maintain their precision when everything around them was falling apart. While other students showed predictable signs of stress response, elevated heart rates, shortened breathing, and decreased fine motor control, Elena seemed to enter a state of enhanced calm during these exercises. Her precision actually improved under pressure, her breathing became more controlled, and her movements took on an economy of motion that suggested extensive experience with genuine crisis situations rather than simulated ones. Martinez wasn't the only instructor to notice these anomalies. David Kim, whose expertise in ballistics calculations was considered unmatched, had observed Elena's ability to perform complex mathematical adjustments without the aid of computers or calculation aids that other students required. During a session on computing firing solutions for extreme angles and unusual atmospheric conditions, Elena had provided answers with a speed and accuracy that suggested she'd solved similar problems many times before. When Kim questioned her about her background in mathematics, Elena's response was carefully neutral, mentioning college coursework and personal interest in physics without providing specifics that could be verified or challenged. But Kim's follow-up questions revealed a depth of understanding that went far beyond undergraduate study, touching on principles that were typically learned only through advanced military training or extensive practical application under field conditions. The instructors began discussing Elena during their private briefings, comparing observations, and trying to piece together a picture of a student who didn't fit any of their familiar categories. Her psychological profile suggested someone who'd experienced significant stress but had developed healthy coping mechanisms rather than the typical patterns of trauma response. Her physical conditioning indicated training that went beyond the requirements of competitive shooting, with muscle development and reflexes that suggested military or law enforcement background. But when they attempted to verify her background through normal channels, they found themselves facing carefully constructed walls of privacy. Elena's application had been processed through civilian channels, with references from competitive shooting organizations that confirmed her interest in advanced training without providing details about her specific experience or achievements. Her financial information showed legitimate employment in technical fields that could reasonably support her enrollment in an expensive academy, but offered no clues about any military or law enforcement service that might explain her unusual competencies. The mystery deepened during the 5th week when the academy hosted a visiting delegation from the military's advanced sniper training program. These were active-duty personnel whose achievements in combat zones had earned them opportunities to study at Pine Ridge's civilian program, learning techniques that hadn't yet been incorporated into official military doctrine. Their presence created an unofficial competition among the regular students, with many hoping to demonstrate skills that might lead to future military or contractor opportunities. Elena's behavior during this week was markedly different from her previous pattern. While she maintained her usual quiet presence, careful observation revealed signs of increased tension that hadn't been present during normal training. She avoided direct interaction with the military visitors, positioning herself in ways that minimized the chances of extended conversation or detailed questions about her background. During a joint exercise where civilian students and military personnel worked together on complex shooting scenarios, Elena's performance was deliberately restrained. She completed all requirements but avoided demonstrating any capabilities that might attract special attention from the visiting soldiers, some of whom had combat experience in the same regions where classified shooting records had been established by personnel whose identities remained protected by operational security protocols. The week concluded with a demonstration by the military delegation showcasing techniques and equipment that represented the current state-of-the-art in precision shooting. The distances achieved were impressive by civilian standards but fell short of the extreme ranges that had become legendary within classified military circles. As the demonstration concluded, one of the visiting sergeants made an offhand comment about shots that pushed beyond 4,000 yards, mentioning achievements that couldn't be officially acknowledged but were well known within the special operations community. Elena's reaction to this comment was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her breathing pattern changed for exactly 3 seconds, and her eyes moved to scan the horizon in a way that suggested she was automatically calculating wind conditions and ballistic solutions for the extreme ranges being discussed. The response lasted less than 5 seconds before she caught herself and resumed her carefully maintained facade of interested but inexperienced civilian student. But Instructor Martinez caught every detail of the reaction, recognizing it as the involuntary response of someone whose training ran so deep that certain stimuli triggered automatic responses, regardless of conscious intention to remain hidden. The observation confirmed her growing suspicion that Elena represented far more than appeared on the surface, that her presence at Pine Ridge Academy involved purposes that went well beyond the stated goal of improving her competitive shooting skills. As the 5th week drew to a close, the academy prepared for its most challenging phase of training. The final 3 weeks would focus on extreme-range precision shooting, pushing students to distances and conditions that separated those with genuine potential from those who'd reached their practical limitations. It was during this phase that the Academy's most ambitious students attempted to challenge existing records, to push beyond what had been previously achieved in the controlled environment of Ghost Valley. The stage was being set for confrontations that would strip away carefully maintained facades and reveal truths that some participants had spent years trying to forget. In the thin air of the Colorado mountains, where bullets traveled farther than seemed physically possible, and secrets had their own weight in the ballistic calculations, Elena's quiet presence was about to become the center of a storm that would challenge everything Pine Ridge Academy thought it knew about human potential and the price of achieving the impossible. The Academy's evening briefing sessions had become informal gatherings where students discussed the day's challenges and shared insights that weren't covered in the formal curriculum. These sessions revealed the social dynamics that had developed over the first 5 weeks, with natural leaders emerging from among the military veterans and experienced competitive shooters taking on mentoring roles for less experienced participants. Elena rarely participated in these gatherings, preferring to review her notes in solitude or perform the meticulous equipment maintenance that precision shooting demanded. But her absence was noted by others, particularly by a group of trainees who'd begun to question why someone would invest in such expensive training, while seemingly avoiding the collaborative learning that represented one of the Academy's most valuable resources. This group was led informally by Jake Thompson, a former Army Ranger whose transition to civilian life had included considerable success in competitive shooting circuits. Thompson's military experience had taught him to value team building and mutual support, principles that he'd brought with him to Pine Ridge. His natural charisma and genuine expertise had made him a focal point for many of the other trainees, who appreciated his willingness to share knowledge and his ability to explain complex concepts in accessible terms. Thompson had initially tried to include Elena in the group's activities, recognizing that her technical knowledge could benefit everyone involved. But her consistent pattern of polite declination had eventually led him to interpret her behavior as standoffishness rather than privacy preference. His military background had taught him to be suspicious of people who didn't participate in unit cohesion activities, viewing such behavior as potentially indicative of hidden agendas or character flaws that could compromise group effectiveness. As the weeks progressed, Thompson's initial attempt at inclusion had evolved into subtle criticism of Elena's unwillingness to contribute to the group's collective learning efforts. His comments were never directly confrontational, but they carried implications that Elena's academic success came at the expense of practical application skills, that her technical knowledge was purely theoretical rather than based on real-world experience. These criticisms resonated with some of the other trainees, particularly those who'd struggled with the academy's demanding academic requirements while excelling in the practical shooting exercises. The suggestion that Elena was somehow taking an easier path by focusing on book learning rather than pushing herself to achieve difficult shots provided a convenient explanation for their own academic struggles while maintaining their self-image as practical, results-oriented shooters. The dynamic created an undercurrent of tension that manifested in small ways during training exercises. Elena found herself partnered with less experienced shooters during team exercises, assigned to equipment that was functional but not optimal, and excluded from informal study groups where other students shared insights and preparation strategies. The exclusion was subtle enough to avoid instructor attention, but persistent enough to create an environment where Elena's isolation became increasingly pronounced. What the group didn't recognize was that their behavior was pushing Elena into a position where maintaining her cover story was becoming increasingly difficult. Her natural instincts, honed by years of experience in environments where teamwork meant survival, struggled against her conscious decision to remain anonymous and unremarkable. The tension between her genuine desire to help other students succeed and her need to protect secrets that weren't hers alone to reveal created internal conflict that required constant energy to manage. The situation reached a critical point during a particularly challenging exercise in the 6th week, where students were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances under time pressure. The exercise was designed to simulate real-world scenarios where precision shooters might need to neutralize multiple threats in rapid succession, requiring not only accuracy but also the ability to quickly adjust for different ranges and environmental conditions. Thompson's informal group had developed a strategy for supporting each other during such exercises, with more experienced members providing wind calls and range estimations for those still developing their environmental reading skills. Elena, working alone as usual, was expected to complete the exercise without such assistance, relying entirely on her individual capabilities to succeed. The exercise began under challenging conditions, with variable winds creating complex ballistic problems that required constant adjustment. Most students struggled with the rapid transitions between targets, taking extra time to calculate firing solutions or accepting reduced precision in order to maintain the required pace. Elena's performance was steady but unremarkable, meeting the minimum requirements without demonstrating any exceptional capabilities that might attract unwanted attention. But midway through the exercise, one of Thompson's group members encountered a problem that threatened to result in a dangerous situation. The student had misread wind conditions for a particularly challenging shot and was preparing to fire a solution that would have sent his bullet dangerously close to safety markers that protected observers and other students. The range safety officer was positioned too far away to intervene in time, and the student was too focused on his sight picture to recognize the error. Elena saw the developing situation and faced a choice that perfectly encapsulated her dilemma at Pine Ridge Academy. She could maintain her cover and allow the safety violation to occur, risking injury to others but protecting her own anonymity. Or she could intervene using knowledge and reflexes that would inevitably raise questions about her background and experience. The choice took less than a second to make. Elena's voice cut across the range, with the authority and precision of someone accustomed to preventing disasters, rather than merely observing them. Her warning was specific, technical, and delivered with a confidence that caused the endangered student to immediately cease his firing sequence and reassess his solution. The intervention prevented what could have been a serious accident, but it also revealed capabilities that Elena had successfully hidden for 6 weeks. Her ability to instantly assess the ballistic problem, recognize the safety hazard, and provide a correct solution demonstrated experience that went far beyond anything suggested by her official background. More significantly, the automatic authority in her voice revealed training in crisis management that belonged to military or law enforcement professionals rather than civilian competitive shooters. Thompson's group immediately recognized that Elena had just demonstrated expertise that exceeded their own, despite her previous pattern of apparently struggling with challenges that they'd successfully overcome. The contradiction forced them to reassess their assumptions about her capabilities and raised questions about why someone with such obvious knowledge and reflexes had been content to remain unremarkable for so long. The range safety officer's report of the incident included praise for Elena's quick thinking and accurate assessment, but it also triggered protocols that required additional background verification for students who demonstrated unexpected capabilities during training exercises. Pine Ridge Academy's insurance and safety requirements mandated that any student who showed evidence of advanced tactical training undergo additional screening to ensure that their presence didn't create security risks for other participants or academy personnel. Elena found herself summoned to a private meeting with Chief Instructor Webb, whose reputation included not only exceptional shooting skills but also extensive experience in military intelligence and security operations. Webb's approach to the meeting was professional and respectful, but his questions probed areas that Elena had hoped to avoid throughout her time at the academy. Webb's experience with operational security meant that he recognized the patterns of someone whose background included classified activities that couldn't be casually discussed. His questions were carefully crafted to allow Elena maximum privacy while still satisfying the academy's institutional requirements for student verification. But even his diplomatically worded inquiries pushed Elena into territory where maintaining her cover story required answers that bordered on deception rather than mere omission. The meeting concluded without immediate resolution, with Webb indicating that he needed time to verify certain details before Elena could continue with the Academy's most advanced training modules. The implication was clear that her demonstration of exceptional situation awareness had triggered scrutiny that she'd successfully avoided for 6 weeks, but which now threatened to expose secrets that had brought her to Pine Ridge Academy in the first place. As Elena returned to her quarters, she faced the reality that her carefully constructed anonymity was beginning to crumble under the weight of her own competence. The final weeks of training would push all students to their limits, creating scenarios where maintaining artificial limitations while ensuring safety and success would become increasingly difficult. The stage was set for confrontations that would ultimately force her to choose between protecting her secrets and demonstrating capabilities that could redefine what everyone at Pine Ridge Academy believed about human potential in the realm of precision shooting. The evening conversations among the other trainees had taken on a new dynamic, with Thompson's group openly speculating about Elena's background and qualifications. Their previous dismissal of her capabilities had transformed into suspicious curiosity about what she might be hiding, and why someone with obvious expertise had chosen to remain unremarkable for so long. The questions being raised had no good answers that wouldn't compromise Elena's position, setting up conflicts that seemed increasingly inevitable as the Academy's most challenging phase of training approached. In the thin air of the Colorado mountains, where secrets carried weight in ballistic calculations and the line between impossible and inevitable was measured in fractions of inches at distances measured in miles, Elena's quiet presence had become the center of a developing storm that would soon test everything she'd learned about the price of keeping promises made in another war, to people whose names couldn't be spoken, for reasons that classified documents would never fully explain. The final phase was about to begin, and with it, the ultimate test of whether some secrets were worth keeping, even when silence might mean missing the chance to demonstrate that the impossible was merely something that hadn't been properly attempted yet. The 7th week at Pine Ridge Tactical Academy arrived with weather conditions that veteran instructors described as challenging but manageable, the kind of environmental complexity that separated students who truly understood long-range precision from those who'd merely memorized the theory. Morning temperatures hovered near freezing while afternoon highs reached into the 70s, creating thermal layers that bent light and altered bullet trajectories in ways that required constant recalculation and intuitive adjustment. Elena's meeting with Chief Instructor Webb had concluded without resolution, leaving her in an administrative limbo that allowed her to continue training while her background underwent additional verification. The uncertainty created pressure that manifested in subtle ways throughout her daily routine. Her equipment maintenance, always meticulous, became obsessive. Her note-taking, previously comprehensive, expanded to include details that served no practical purpose beyond providing distraction from questions she couldn't answer, without compromising secrets that weren't hers alone to reveal. The other students had noticed the change in Elena's behavior, though they interpreted it through the lens of their own assumptions about her capabilities and motivations. Thompson's informal leadership group saw her increased isolation as confirmation that she was hiding something significant, while the few students who'd remained neutral began to wonder if their earlier assessments had been premature. The range safety incident had demonstrated technical knowledge that exceeded anything she'd previously revealed, but it also raised questions about why someone with such obvious expertise had been content to remain unremarkable for so long. Instructor Martinez found herself in a delicate position as the week progressed. Her observations of Elena had accumulated into a pattern that suggested military background, but the student's official documentation provided no confirmation of such service. Military personnel transitioning to civilian careers typically carried behavioral markers that were recognizable to those who knew what to look for. But Elena's pattern was different, suggesting someone who'd learned to actively suppress such indicators rather than simply allowing them to fade naturally over time. During advanced environmental training sessions, Martinez began incorporating scenarios that would typically trigger automatic responses from anyone with extensive field experience. Discussions of ballistic performance in desert conditions, technical details about equipment used in specific theaters of operation, and casual mentions of tactical procedures used by special operations units all failed to produce the recognition responses that Martinez expected to see from someone with Elena's apparent level of technical knowledge. The absence of such responses was itself revealing, suggesting that Elena was actively managing her reactions, rather than simply lacking the experience to understand the references. This level of conscious control indicated training in operational security that went beyond what civilian competitive shooters would typically encounter, even those who'd achieved high levels of success in precision shooting competitions. The week's most significant challenge was a long-range shooting exercise designed to push students beyond their previous achievements. Ghost Valley's longest range would be utilized, with targets placed at distances approaching 4,000 yards under conditions that required students to integrate everything they'd learned about environmental reading, ballistic calculation, and equipment optimization. The exercise was structured as individual performance rather than team effort, eliminating the collaborative support that some students had relied upon during earlier challenges. Elena approached the exercise with the same methodical preparation she'd demonstrated throughout her time at the academy. Her equipment check was thorough but efficient, her environmental observations comprehensive but not obsessive, her ballistic calculations precise but not excessive. To casual observers, her routine appeared similar to other students preparing for a challenging shot, but careful attention revealed subtle differences that suggested experience with similar scenarios under conditions where success had consequences beyond academic grades. The shooting order was determined by previous performance rankings, placing Elena in the middle of the sequence where her results would neither lead nor conclude the day's events. This positioning suited her preference for avoiding attention, but it also meant that she'd have opportunities to observe other students' approaches and results before her own attempt. Thompson's group dominated the early shooting positions, their previous performance having earned them the advantage of shooting before environmental conditions could deteriorate. Their results were impressive by most standards, with several achieving precision that exceeded academy averages for the distance involved. Thompson himself managed a group that would have been considered exceptional in most competitive contexts, demonstrating the leadership and capability that had made him a focal point for other students. But the conditions were not optimal for extreme-range precision shooting. Variable winds created ballistic problems that required constant adjustment, while temperature gradients complicated the already challenging task of calculating accurate firing solutions. Several students achieved results that met minimum requirements while falling short of their personal expectations, creating frustration that accumulated throughout the morning session. By the time Elena's turn arrived, the environmental conditions had deteriorated further. Crosswinds that had been manageable earlier in the day had increased to levels that challenged even the most experienced students, while atmospheric pressure changes created additional variables that affected bullet trajectory in subtle but significant ways. The targets at maximum range were barely visible through even the most advanced optical equipment, appearing as mathematical abstractions rather than physical objects that could be engaged with conventional precision shooting techniques. Elena's preparation for the shot was unhurried but efficient. Her environmental observations included details that other students had overlooked, noting atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet performance in ways that weren't covered by standard ballistic calculation methods. Her equipment adjustments were minimal but precise, suggesting an understanding of her rifle's characteristics that went beyond manufacturer specifications and standard accuracy testing. The most significant difference was in her approach to reading environmental conditions. While other students had relied heavily on electronic wind meters and environmental monitoring equipment, Elena incorporated observations that couldn't be quantified by mechanical instruments. The movement of grass at different elevations, the behavior of birds crossing the range, the subtle changes in light patterns that indicated thermal activity all contributed to her assessment of conditions that would affect her shot. Her firing position was textbook perfect, but with subtle modifications that suggested training in environments where comfort was secondary to effectiveness. Her breathing pattern was controlled but not mechanical, her trigger control smooth but not hesitant, her follow-through complete but not exaggerated. Everything about her technique suggested someone who'd learned precision shooting as a tool rather than an academic subject, someone whose training had been reinforced by necessity rather than simply refined through practice. The shot was fired without fanfare, the report echoing across Ghost Valley with the sharp crack that indicated proper ballistic performance. Elena remained in position for the prescribed time, maintaining sight picture and position discipline, while spotters downrange confirmed impact location. Her expression revealed nothing about her expectations or assessment of the shot's success, maintaining the neutral professionalism that had characterized her approach throughout the Academy's training program. The spotter's report came back after what seemed like an extended delay, suggesting that impact location was at the limits of visual identification even through high-powered spotting scopes. When the confirmation finally arrived, it carried implications that would fundamentally alter the dynamic among students and instructors at Pine Ridge Tactical Academy. Elena's shot had achieved precision that exceeded previous Academy records by a significant margin. The impact was not only on target, but placed with accuracy that demonstrated mastery of environmental conditions that had challenged every other student throughout the day. More significantly, her ballistic solution had accounted for variables that weren't addressed by standard calculation methods, suggesting knowledge of advanced techniques that weren't part of the Academy's curriculum. The immediate reaction from other students was stunned silence, followed by demands for confirmation of the measurement. Such precision at extreme range required not only exceptional shooting skills, but also understanding of ballistic principles that typically took years to develop through extensive practical application. The suggestion that Elena had achieved such results while maintaining her previous pattern of unremarkable performance created cognitive dissonance that challenged everyone's assumptions about her capabilities and background. Thompson's reaction was particularly complex, combining genuine respect for exceptional achievement with frustration about his own assessment errors and suspicion about Elena's motivations for maintaining such an effective facade. His military background had taught him to value honesty and straightforward communication, making Elena's apparent deception feel like a personal betrayal rather than simply an academic surprise. The instructor's reaction was more measured, but equally significant. Webb and Martinez exchanged meaningful glances that confirmed their suspicions about Elena's background, while raising new questions about her presence at the Academy and her purposes for maintaining anonymity. The level of precision she demonstrated indicated training that was typically reserved for military special operations personnel or other professionals whose work required capabilities that exceeded conventional precision shooting standards. But perhaps most telling was Elena's own reaction to the achievement. Rather than displaying satisfaction or pride at having exceeded previous Academy records, she seemed almost relieved that the shot had been successful, as if failure would have created consequences that went beyond personal disappointment. Her immediate transition to equipment cleanup and documentation suggested someone for whom exceptional shooting was routine rather than remarkable, someone whose standards for success were calibrated to requirements that exceeded academic achievement. The afternoon debriefing session took on an atmosphere of tension that hadn't been present during previous weeks. Elena's achievement had demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be easily explained by her official background. while her continued refusal to discuss her training or experience created suspicion among students who'd begun to question whether her presence at the academy involved purposes beyond those stated in her enrollment application. Thompson's group became increasingly vocal in their speculation about Elena's background, suggesting possibilities that ranged from undisclosed military service to involvement in classified programs that would explain her exceptional capabilities while accounting for her need to maintain anonymity. Their discussions created an atmosphere where Elena's privacy was increasingly viewed as suspicious rather than simply personal preference, where her achievements were interpreted as evidence of deception rather than simply exceptional skill. The situation was complicated by Elena's continued refusal to acknowledge the significance of her achievement or to provide explanations that would satisfy her fellow students' curiosity. Her responses to direct questions remained diplomatically evasive, providing minimal information while avoiding outright falsehoods that could be later contradicted by background verification. The approach was effective in protecting her secrets but unsuccessful in reducing the tension that her performance had created among the academy's student population. Webb's evening briefing with the instructional staff focused heavily on Elena's demonstration and its implications for the academy's training program. The precision she'd achieved had exceeded what the instructors considered possible under the environmental conditions present during the exercise, suggesting either exceptional natural ability or extensive practical experience that hadn't been disclosed during the enrollment process. Either possibility raised questions about the academy's student evaluation procedures and the effectiveness of their background verification protocols. Martinez reported her accumulated observations about Elena's behavior and capabilities, noting patterns that suggested military training but acknowledging the absence of confirmatory evidence from official sources. The contradiction between Elena's apparent expertise and her documented background created administrative challenges that required careful handling to avoid compromising the academy's reputation while ensuring that appropriate security protocols were maintained. Kim contributed technical analysis of Elena's ballistic calculations, noting that her firing solution had incorporated environmental factors that weren't part of the academy's standard curriculum. The techniques she'd demonstrated suggested access to advanced training materials or practical experience in environments where such knowledge was operationally necessary rather than academically interesting. The level of sophistication implied background that exceeded what civilian competitive shooters would typically encounter during their career development. The instructors concluded their discussion without reaching definitive conclusions about Elena's background or appropriate responses to her demonstration. The absence of clear evidence for security concerns had to be balanced against the academy's responsibility to maintain appropriate standards for student screening and verification. Elena's achievement had created a situation where ignoring the implications would compromise institutional integrity, while investigating them might violate student privacy rights that the academy was contractually obligated to protect. As the evening concluded, Elena found herself increasingly isolated from her fellow students while facing growing pressure from academy administration to provide explanations that she couldn't offer without compromising secrets that weren't hers alone to reveal. The success that she'd tried so hard to avoid had created exactly the situation that had motivated her enrollment under false pretenses in the first place. The 8th and final week of training was approaching, with it the academy's most advanced exercises and the culminating demonstration where students would attempt to achieve personal bests under conditions that replicated real-world precision shooting challenges. Elena's record-breaking performance had established expectations that would be difficult to meet while maintaining her cover story, but failure to perform at similar levels would raise different questions about the consistency of her capabilities and the authenticity of her previous achievement. Thompson's informal leadership among the other students had evolved into something approaching investigation, with his group actively seeking information about Elena's background through sources that extended beyond the academy's official channels. Their military and law enforcement contacts were being utilized to research possibilities that Elena's official documentation didn't address, creating pressure that could eventually compromise the operational security measures that had protected her identity throughout her civilian transition. The situation had reached a point where Elena's choices were becoming increasingly limited. Maintaining her anonymity required accepting performance limitations that might compromise her safety during advanced exercises, while demonstrating her full capabilities would inevitably expose background that couldn't be explained without revealing classified operations and personnel whose identities remained protected by ongoing security requirements. In the thin air of the Colorado mountains, where bullets traveled farther than seemed physically possible and secrets had their own ballistic coefficients, Elena's quiet presence had become the center of a storm that threatened to expose truths that some people had died protecting, The final week would bring challenges that would test everything she'd learned about the price of keeping promises made in environments where precision meant survival and mistakes were measured in lives rather than scores. The Academy's evening routine continued around her, with students preparing equipment and reviewing techniques for the final challenges that would determine their graduation status and future opportunities. But for Elena, the preparation involved calculations that extended beyond ballistics and environmental conditions to include risk assessments and contingency planning that belonged to a different kind of warfare than anything Pine Ridge Academy was designed to teach. The stage was set for confrontations that would strip away carefully maintained facades and reveal truths that had been protected by years of silence and sacrifice. In a place where the impossible was routinely achieved through precision and dedication, Elena was about to discover whether some secrets were worth keeping, even when maintaining them, might mean sacrificing the chance to demonstrate capabilities that could redefine human potential in the realm of long-range precision shooting. The morning of the 8th week brought weather conditions that the Academy's meteorological staff described as unprecedented in their complexity and challenge. Multiple atmospheric systems were converging over Ghost Valley, creating environmental variables that would test the limits of both student capability and institutional safety protocols. Several instructors suggested postponing the final exercises until conditions improved, but Webb's assessment was that real-world precision shooting rarely occurred under ideal circumstances, making the challenging conditions an appropriate final test for students who'd spent 8 weeks preparing for such scenarios. Elena's preparation for the final week was methodical, but revealed signs of internal tension that hadn't been present during earlier phases of training. Her equipment maintenance, always meticulous, expanded to include redundant checks and backup preparations that suggested someone preparing for scenarios where equipment failure could have consequences beyond simple exercise failure. Her review of environmental data was comprehensive to the point of obsession, noting patterns and trends that exceeded the requirements for academic success while providing information that could be crucial for survival in hostile environments. The other students had organized informal betting pools about Elena's performance during the final exercises, with opinions divided between those who expected her to repeat her previous exceptional achievement and those who suspected that her earlier success had been fortunate rather than skillful. Thompson's group had evolved beyond speculation into active investigation, utilizing contacts and resources to research possibilities that Elena's official background didn't address. The first major exercise of the final week was designed to replicate the stress and complexity of real-world precision shooting scenarios. Students would engage multiple targets at varying distances under time pressure while dealing with environmental conditions that required constant recalculation and adjustment. The exercise was structured to reveal not only technical shooting skills, but also decision-making capabilities and stress management techniques that would be crucial for success in professional applications of precision shooting. Elena's turn came during the afternoon session when environmental conditions had reached their most challenging levels of the day. Crosswinds were gusting beyond the limits that most precision shooting manuals considered manageable, while temperature gradients were creating optical distortions that made target identification difficult, even through advanced spotting equipment. The combination of environmental factors created ballistic problems that exceeded what standard calculation methods could reliably solve, requiring intuitive adjustments based on experience rather than mathematical formulas. Her approach to the exercise was notably different from other students who'd attempted the same challenge earlier in the day. While they had relied heavily on technological aids and systematic calculation methods, Elena incorporated environmental observations that couldn't be quantified by electronic instruments, but which provided crucial information about atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. Her preparation was efficient but comprehensive, noting details that other students had overlooked while avoiding the time-consuming verification procedures that had slowed previous attempts. The most significant difference was in her firing sequence, which demonstrated tactical awareness that extended beyond simple target engagement to include positioning and timing considerations that belong to operational environments rather than academic exercises. Her target selection prioritized threats in order of strategic importance rather than simply following the numerical sequence that other students had used, while her shooting positions incorporated mobility and concealment factors that weren't required by the exercise parameters but which suggested training in environments where such considerations meant survival. Her precision was exceptional under conditions that had challenged every other student throughout the day, but more revealing was the efficiency with which she achieved such results. Her environmental assessments were rapid but accurate, her ballistic calculations minimal but effective, her equipment adjustments precise but not time-consuming. Everything about her approach suggested someone for whom challenging precision shooting was routine rather than exceptional, someone whose training had been calibrated to requirements that exceeded academic achievement. The results confirmed what the instructors had begun to suspect about Elena's background and capabilities. Her performance exceeded previous academy records under environmental conditions that made such achievement seem impossible according to conventional understanding of ballistic principles and human capability. More significantly, her techniques demonstrated knowledge of advanced precision shooting methods that weren't part of civilian training programs, suggesting military special operations background or involvement in classified programs that would account for her exceptional skills while explaining her need to maintain anonymity. Thompson's reaction to Elena's demonstration was immediate and confrontational. His military background had taught him to value directness and honesty in professional relationships, making Elena's apparent deception feel like personal betrayal rather than simple privacy preference. His leadership among the other students provided a platform for expressing frustration that resonated with others who'd begun to question Elena's motivations for maintaining such effective anonymity, while demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything they'd previously encountered. The confrontation began during the evening debriefing session when Thompson directly challenged Elena's refusal to discuss her background or training. His questions were specific and technically informed, designed to force responses that would either confirm or deny the military experience that her performance suggested. Elena's attempts to maintain diplomatic evasion were increasingly unsuccessful, as Thompson's persistence revealed inconsistencies in her cover story that couldn't be explained by civilian competitive shooting background. The exchange escalated beyond academic discussion into personal confrontation as Thompson's frustration with Elena's evasiveness combined with his suspicion about her motivations for enrolling at Pine Ridge Academy under what he increasingly believed were false pretenses. His military background had taught him that operational security was important, but that deliberate deception of teammates was unacceptable, making Elena's behavior seem like betrayal of the trust and collaboration that made advanced training effective. Elena found herself in an increasingly untenable position as Thompson's questions became more specific and technically detailed, requiring responses that would either compromise her operational security or confirm the suspicions that his investigation had already developed. Her attempts to deflect attention were unsuccessful against someone whose military experience had included interrogation resistance training and who recognized evasion techniques that belonged to intelligence operations rather than civilian privacy preferences. The confrontation reached a critical point when Thompson demanded that Elena demonstrate the techniques that had enabled her exceptional performance under conditions that had challenged everyone else at the academy. His challenge was framed as verification of her claims about civilian competitive shooting background, but it was clearly intended to force her into demonstrating capabilities that would either confirm or contradict the military training that her performance suggested. Elena's response to the challenge would determine whether she could maintain the anonymity that had brought her to Pine Ridge Academy, or whether she would be forced to reveal background that was protected by operational security requirements that extended beyond personal privacy into national security concerns that affected people whose identities remained classified for reasons that couldn't be casually explained to civilian students at a tactical shooting academy. The stage was set for revelations that would challenge everything the Academy thought it knew about human potential and the price that some people paid for achieving capabilities that exceeded conventional understanding of what was possible when necessity stripped away every limitation except the laws of physics and the human capacity for precision under pressure that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The silence that followed Thompson's challenge stretched across the debriefing room like a taut wire, vibrating with tension that everyone present could feel but none fully understood. Elena stood motionless, her hands steady despite the pressure of 20 pairs of eyes waiting for a response that could define the remainder of her carefully constructed civilian life. The mathematical precision that had governed her every decision for the past 8 weeks suddenly seemed inadequate for calculating the variables that now determined her future. Chief Instructor Webb's voice cut through the tension with the authority of someone accustomed to diffusing volatile situations before they compromised institutional integrity. His interruption wasn't dramatic, merely the calm assertion of administrative control over a situation that threatened to escalate beyond the bounds of professional training discourse. But his timing suggested that he'd been monitoring the exchange more carefully than casual observation might have indicated, recognizing patterns that belonged to operational security rather than academic privacy. Webb's request for Elena to accompany him to his office was delivered with diplomatic neutrality that managed to extract her from Thompson's confrontation without validating the suspicions that had motivated the challenge. The other students were dismissed to evening equipment maintenance with instructions that left no ambiguity about the inappropriateness of continuing speculation about fellow students' backgrounds or qualifications. The message was clear that institutional authority would not tolerate harassment disguised as academic inquiry. Elena's walk to Webb's office provided momentary relief from the pressure of maintaining her facade under direct scrutiny. But it also confirmed that her exceptional performance had triggered administrative attention that could no longer be deflected through diplomatic evasion. The walls of Pine Ridge Academy's administrative building displayed photographs and citations that represented decades of precision shooting achievements, creating an environment where extraordinary capability was routine rather than remarkable. But Elena's situation was different. Complicated by questions that extended beyond simple technical proficiency into areas where wrong answers could compromise more than academic standing. Webb's office reflected the dual nature of his position as both civilian instructor and former military professional. Advanced ballistics texts shared shelf space with operational planning manuals that bore classification markings indicating restricted access requirements. Environmental monitoring equipment provided real-time data about conditions across Ghost Valley, while communication systems maintained contact with military installations, where Webb's consulting services remained in demand despite his transition to civilian education. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in professional interrogation techniques, applied with sufficient subtlety to avoid creating legal or ethical complications for either participant. Webb's questions were technically specific without being operationally invasive, designed to elicit information about Elena's background while respecting the boundaries that protected classified activities from unauthorized disclosure. His approach acknowledged that Elena's situation might involve legitimate security concerns that couldn't be resolved through conventional administrative procedures. Elena's responses demonstrated equal sophistication in managing sensitive information under pressure that couldn't be completely deflected without creating suspicion that might trigger more invasive investigation. Her answers provided sufficient detail to satisfy Webb's institutional requirements while protecting operational security measures that extended beyond personal privacy into national security concerns that affected people whose identities remained classified for reasons that civilian academic administrators weren't authorized to understand. The exchange revealed mutual recognition that Elena's presence at Pine Ridge Academy involved circumstances that exceeded routine educational enrollment. Webb's experience with classified military operations had taught him to identify personnel whose civilian transitions were complicated by background that couldn't be fully documented through conventional channels, while Elena's operational training had prepared her to manage such situations without compromising security requirements that protected more than personal anonymity. But the conversation also revealed limitations in both participants' ability to resolve the situation through conventional means. Webb's administrative authority was constrained by privacy regulations that prevented him from pursuing investigation beyond what Elena's performance had already revealed, while Elena's operational requirements prevented her from providing explanations that would satisfy legitimate institutional concerns about student verification and safety protocols. The impasse was broken by Webb's decision to implement extraordinary measures that reflected his understanding of Elena's situation and his commitment to protecting both institutional integrity and personal security requirements that extended beyond academic considerations. His proposal was carefully crafted to address the immediate administrative challenges while creating framework for managing the longer-term implications of Elena's presence at the academy. Webb's solution involved temporary suspension of Elena's participation in group exercises pending completion of enhanced background verification procedures that would either confirm her eligibility for continued training or provide appropriate alternative arrangements that protected both institutional and personal security requirements. The approach was diplomatically neutral while acknowledging the exceptional circumstances that conventional enrollment procedures hadn't anticipated. Elena's response to Webb's proposal revealed the depth of her dilemma and the price she was willing to pay to maintain operational security requirements that protected more than personal anonymity. Her acceptance of temporary isolation from academy activities demonstrated commitment to protecting classified information that extended beyond individual career considerations into operational security measures that affected personnel whose identities and activities remained protected by ongoing national security requirements. But the administrative solution created new challenges as other students interpreted Elena's suspension as confirmation of their suspicions about her background and motivations. Thompson's group viewed the development as vindication of their investigation efforts while intensifying their attempts to research possibilities that Elena's official documentation didn't address. Their military and law enforcement contacts were utilized to explore theories that ranged from undisclosed special operations service to involvement in classified programs that would explain her exceptional capabilities. The speculation created an atmosphere of tension that affected the entire academy as students divided into factions supporting different theories about Elena's identity and purposes. Some viewed her as a fraud whose deception had finally been exposed, while others saw her as a legitimate professional whose privacy was being violated by institutional overreaction to exceptional performance. The division disrupted the collaborative learning environment that had characterized previous weeks of training. Martinez found herself caught between conflicting responsibilities as Elena's situation created pressure that extended beyond individual student management into broader questions about academy policies and procedures. Her observations had contributed to the administrative scrutiny that Elena now faced, but her professional experience also suggested that the students' behavior was consistent with legitimate operational security requirements, rather than fraudulent misrepresentation of qualifications. The instructor's dilemma was complicated by her recognition that Elena's techniques and capabilities exceeded what civilian competitive shooting background could explain, while also acknowledging that military special operations personnel often transitioned to civilian careers under circumstances that required protecting classified background information. The balance between institutional security requirements and individual privacy rights created challenges that conventional academy procedures weren't designed to address. Kim's technical analysis of Elena's ballistic calculations had revealed methodologies that belonged to advanced military training programs whose curricula weren't available through civilian channels. The sophistication of her environmental assessment techniques suggested access to classified research and development efforts that remained restricted to personnel with appropriate security clearances and operational requirements. The implications raised questions about how such knowledge had been acquired, and whether its application in civilian contexts created security concerns that extended beyond academy jurisdiction. The instructor's evening briefing session focused on developing strategies for managing Elena's situation without compromising either institutional integrity or potential security requirements that none of them were fully qualified to assess. The absence of clear guidance from higher authorities created pressure to make decisions based on incomplete information, while accepting responsibility for consequences that could affect both Elena's future and the academy's reputation. Webb's consultation with military contacts had provided unofficial confirmation that Elena's background included elements that couldn't be disclosed through conventional channels, but the information was insufficient to determine appropriate administrative responses that would satisfy both institutional requirements and operational security considerations. The informal nature of the confirmation created additional complications, as it couldn't be used to justify official decisions without potentially compromising sources whose cooperation depended on maintaining plausible deniability about their assistance. The situation reached a critical juncture when Thompson's investigation efforts produced information that threatened to compromise operational security measures that protected more than Elena's individual privacy. His contacts within military intelligence communities had identified possibilities that connected Elena's background to classified operations whose personnel rosters remained protected by ongoing security requirements that extended beyond individual career transitions into active operational considerations. Thompson's discovery of this information created ethical dilemmas about his responsibility to share intelligence that could affect academy security, while also respecting the legitimate privacy rights of fellow students whose background might include classified service that couldn't be casually disclosed. His military training had emphasized the importance of operational security, but it had also taught him that deception of teammates could compromise unit effectiveness and safety. The internal conflict between these competing principles drove Thompson to seek guidance from his former military supervisors, whose responses confirmed his suspicions about Elena's background, while also warning him about the potential consequences of unauthorized disclosure of classified personnel information. The feedback created pressure to balance his responsibility for academy security against potential legal and ethical violations that could result from pursuing investigation beyond appropriate boundaries. But Thompson's investigation had already produced enough information to confirm that Elena's presence at Pine Ridge Academy involved deception that extended beyond simple privacy preferences into potential security considerations that affected more than individual career development. The knowledge created responsibility for action that could either protect institutional integrity or compromise operational security measures that protected personnel whose identities remained classified for ongoing national security reasons. The confrontation was inevitable, driven by Thompson's conviction that Elena's deception threatened the trust and collaboration that made advanced training effective, combined with his suspicion that her purposes at the academy extended beyond stated educational objectives. His military background had taught him that allowing security concerns to remain unresolved created risks that could affect everyone involved in training operations. Thompson's approach to the confrontation was carefully planned to maximize pressure while minimizing his own legal exposure to charges of harassment or unauthorized disclosure of classified information. His strategy involved presenting Elena with evidence that her cover story was inconsistent with verifiable facts, while demanding explanations that would either confirm or contradict the military background that his investigation had suggested. The timing of Thompson's confrontation was calculated to occur during evening hours, when institutional supervision was minimal, but witness presence was sufficient to provide documentation of Elena's responses to specific allegations about her background and qualifications. The setting was designed to create maximum psychological pressure, while maintaining plausible deniability about the investigative methods that had produced the information being presented. Elena recognized the tactical sophistication of Thompson's approach, and understood that her options for maintaining operational security had been effectively eliminated by information that couldn't be dismissed through conventional evasion techniques. Her training had prepared her for such situations, but it had assumed institutional support and legal protection that weren't available in civilian academic contexts, where different rules and procedures governed information disclosure requirements. The moment of truth arrived when Thompson presented evidence that connected Elena's identity to classified military operations, whose personnel rosters included individuals whose civilian transitions had been managed through programs designed to protect operational security while enabling career development. The information was specific enough to confirm Elena's military background while remaining general enough to avoid unauthorized disclosure of classified operational details. Elena's response to Thompson's evidence marked the end of her ability to maintain the civilian contractor facade that had enabled her enrollment at Pine Ridge Academy. The mathematical precision that had governed her tactical decisions for 8 weeks suddenly crystallized into a single calculation that determined whether protecting operational security was worth sacrificing the training opportunity that had motivated her civilian transition. The choice was made in the space between heartbeats, driven by training that prioritized mission success over personal safety and operational security over individual career advancement. Elena's acknowledgement of her military background was delivered with the controlled precision that characterized everything else about her approach to challenging situations, providing minimum necessary disclosure while protecting classified information that extended beyond personal privacy into ongoing operational requirements. But acknowledgement of military service was insufficient to satisfy Thompson's demands for complete disclosure of her background and purposes at the academy. His investigation had produced enough information to confirm that Elena's service had included special operations assignments whose classification levels exceeded routine military career development, creating suspicion that her civilian transition involved purposes beyond simple educational advancement. The confrontation escalated as Thompson's demands for complete transparency met Elena's operational requirements for protecting classified information that affected personnel, whose identities and activities remained protected by ongoing security considerations. The conflict between academic transparency and operational security created an impasse that conventional conflict resolution procedures weren't designed to address. Elena's final response to Thompson's pressure demonstrated the full extent of her tactical training and operational experience, while revealing the personal cost of maintaining operational security under circumstances that provided no institutional support or legal protection. Her explanation was delivered with the calm authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure that exceeded anything civilian academic environments could generate. The revelation that Elena's military service had included assignments as a precision shooter in special operations units whose achievements remained classified provided context for her exceptional performance while explaining her need for anonymity during civilian transition. Her disclosure confirmed that her capabilities at Pine Ridge Academy represented a fraction of her actual qualifications, that her training had been calibrated to requirements that exceeded anything civilian education could provide. But the revelation also exposed the personal trauma that had motivated her civilian transition and explained the emotional control that had characterized her behavior throughout 8 weeks of training. Elena's acknowledgement that her military service had ended following operational failures that resulted in casualties among personnel whose names couldn't be spoken revealed the psychological burden that drove her quest for redemption through civilian achievement. The silence that followed Elena's disclosure contained recognition from everyone present that they had witnessed something that belonged to classified operational history rather than civilian academic achievement. The understanding changed the dynamic in the room as speculation was replaced by respect for service that extended beyond personal accomplishment into sacrifice that protected people whose identities would never be publicly acknowledged. Thompson's reaction to Elena's revelation demonstrated the complexity of his own relationship with military service and the ethical obligations that accompanied access to classified information. His investigation had revealed truth that satisfied his intellectual curiosity while creating responsibility for protecting information that extended beyond academic interest into operational security requirements that affected personnel whose safety depended on maintaining anonymity. The evening concluded with mutual understanding that Elena's situation exceeded the jurisdiction and capability of civilian academic administration while creating ongoing obligations for all participants to protect information whose disclosure could compromise operational security measures that extended beyond individual privacy into national security considerations that affected personnel whose service continued in context that required absolute anonymity. Elena's transition from anonymous student to revealed special operations veteran marked the beginning of a new phase at Pine Ridge Academy, where her presence would either inspire enhanced training standards or create security complications that would require intervention from authorities whose jurisdiction extended beyond civilian educational institutions into classified operational requirements that governed personnel transitions from military to civilian careers. The transformation was immediate and complete. Within hours of Elena's revelation, Pine Ridge Academy shifted from an institution built on competitive achievement to something approaching sacred ground. Students who had questioned her qualifications now moved with reverent caution in her presence, understanding that they shared space with someone whose service represented sacrifice at levels they couldn't comprehend. Thompson's confrontational leadership dissolved into quiet respect tinged with guilt. His investigation had achieved its objective while revealing the profound cost of Elena's transition from classified operations to civilian anonymity. The former ranger approached Elena privately, his apology carrying weight that extended beyond academic misunderstanding into recognition of shared sacrifice that connected all military personnel regardless of specific service branches or operational assignments. Webb's administrative challenges evolved into unprecedented opportunities as Elena's revelation created possibilities for advanced training that exceeded anything the Academy had previously offered. Her willingness to share tactical knowledge, within security constraints that protected classified information, opened pathways for curriculum development that could benefit precision shooters across military and civilian applications. The most significant change was in Elena herself. The psychological burden of maintaining false identity had lifted, replaced by purposeful engagement that transformed her teaching from reluctant necessity into passionate mission. Her instruction transcended technical proficiency to encompass the mental discipline and ethical considerations that separated precision shooting as sport from precision shooting as sacred responsibility for protecting lives through superior skill. Martinez observed the transformation with professional fascination, noting how Elena's true personality emerged once operational security requirements no longer demanded complete suppression of natural leadership instincts. The quiet student became a commanding instructor whose presence changed the dynamics of every training session through demonstration of capabilities that redefined possibilities for human performance under extreme conditions. Elena's first official demonstration as revealed special operations veteran drew observers from military installations across the region. The shot she attempted pushed beyond the Academy's previous records into territory where success required integration of every environmental variable, with intuitive understanding that belonged to operational experience rather than academic theory. The conditions were deliberately challenging, with environmental factors that created ballistic problems exceeding anything addressed by conventional training protocols. Elena's preparation was efficient but comprehensive, incorporating assessment techniques that weren't documented in civilian instruction manuals, but which provided crucial information about atmospheric conditions affecting bullet trajectory at extreme ranges. Her equipment was standard Academy issue, eliminating advantages that might compromise the demonstration's validity as representation of achievable human performance rather than technological superiority. The target was positioned at maximum range, under conditions that challenged visual identification even through advanced optical systems, creating a scenario that replicated operational requirements where precision meant mission success or catastrophic failure. The shot that followed redefined Pine Ridge Academy's understanding of human potential in precision shooting applications. Elena's bullet traveled through atmospheric conditions that had challenged every previous attempt while achieving accuracy that exceeded mathematical predictions for ballistic performance under such environmental variables. The impact was confirmed through multiple independent measurement systems, establishing new benchmark for precision shooting achievement at extreme range. But the technical achievement was secondary to its demonstration of principles that Elena incorporated into academy curriculum development. Her teaching emphasized the mental discipline required for extreme precision, the ethical responsibility that accompanied capability to affect outcomes at distances where traditional rules of engagement became philosophical abstractions, and the psychological preparation necessary for utilizing such skills in operational contexts where hesitation meant failure. Students responded to Elena's instruction with dedication that exceeded anything academy instructors had previously observed. Her teaching methods integrated technical proficiency with mental preparation that prepared precision shooters for psychological pressures that accompanied real-world applications of their skills. The transformation affected graduation rates, job placement success, and professional development outcomes that established Pine Ridge Academy as premier training institution for precision shooting applications. Elena's personal transformation was equally profound. The guilt and isolation that had driven her civilian transition gradually resolved into purposeful engagement with training mission that honored fallen colleagues while preparing future generations of precision shooters for challenges that required capabilities exceeding conventional military instruction. Her teaching became memorial for personnel whose sacrifice couldn't be publicly acknowledged, while ensuring that their knowledge survived to protect others facing similar operational requirements. The Academy's culture evolved around Elena's influence, developing traditions that honored service while maintaining security protocols protecting classified information. Students learned technical skills within framework that emphasized ethical responsibility and psychological preparation for utilizing precision shooting capabilities in contexts where lives depended on superior performance under impossible conditions. Webb's administrative leadership adapted to incorporate Elena's expertise into institutional planning that positioned Pine Ridge Academy as bridge between civilian competitive shooting and professional applications requiring capabilities that exceeded recreational training standards. The Academy's reputation attracted students whose career aspirations included military, law enforcement, and contractor applications where precision shooting represented critical professional requirement rather than hobby interest. Elena's ongoing instruction became pilgrimage destination for precision shooting professionals seeking advanced training that incorporated operational experience with technical innovation. Her classes consistently filled to capacity with waiting lists extending months into future as demand exceeded availability for instruction that represented unique intersection of classified operational experience with civilian educational accessibility. The memorial wall that Elena requested installation of honored fallen colleagues whose names couldn't be spoken, but whose service was represented through abstract recognition that provided closure for survivors while maintaining security requirements protecting classified operations. The wall became focal point for Academy ceremonies that honored service while respecting anonymity requirements that protected ongoing operational security. Elena's final shot at Pine Ridge Academy was fired during graduation ceremony for her first complete class of students trained according to curriculum that incorporated her operational experience with Academy's established technical standards. The distance exceeded previous records, while conditions replicated operational scenarios where precision meant protecting lives rather than achieving academic recognition. The bullet traveled through atmospheric conditions that challenged every principle of conventional ballistics while achieving accuracy that demonstrated human capability pushed to absolute limits of what physics and training could accomplish together. The achievement represented culmination of Elena's transition from classified operations to civilian instruction, while establishing benchmark for precision shooting that would influence professional development for generations of students whose careers would benefit from her sacrifice and dedication. But perhaps most significantly, Elena's transformation from anonymous student to respected instructor demonstrated that redemption was possible even for those whose service had included operational failures that resulted in losses too painful for public acknowledgement. Her teaching became testament to possibility of transforming guilt into purpose, isolation into leadership, and personal trauma into professional dedication that protected others from experiencing similar losses. Pine Ridge Academy's legacy was permanently changed by Elena's presence, evolving from competitive training institution into sacred space where precision shooting was taught as spiritual discipline requiring technical mastery. integrated with ethical responsibility for utilizing capabilities that could determine outcomes at distances where conventional moral frameworks became inadequate for decision-making under operational pressure. Elena's quiet transformation from hidden veteran to revealed instructor proved that heroes didn't always announce themselves with dramatic gestures or public recognition. Sometimes the most profound service occurred in silence, through teaching that prepared others for challenges that couldn't be fully explained but which required preparation that exceeded anything conventional training could provide. Her legacy lived in every student whose career benefited from instruction that integrated technical proficiency with psychological preparation for utilizing precision shooting skills in contexts where lives depended on superior performance under conditions that tested every aspect of human capability and character. The revolution was complete, measured not in publicity or recognition but in lives protected through superior training that honored sacrifice while preparing future generations for service that required capabilities exceeding conventional understanding of what human beings could achieve when necessity eliminated every limitation except the laws of physics and the human capacity for precision under pressure. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.